On offthehooksports.com, we've been counting down the most important players heading into the 2024 football season. Now, we're a guy named after an animal, Squirrel White. You know who that is. Give us an update of where we've counted down to this point and where we rank Squirrel White in the most important football balls heading into summer camp.
So we've done Javonte Spraggins, John Campbell Jr., Amari Thomas, Brew McCoy, and Ricky Gibson III as our bottom 5 of the top 10. And now we are in the top half, starting with Squirrel White at number 5.
I had one of those moments where I wondered if Squirrel White should be even higher, because you and I believe Dante Thornton's going to slide out to the outside wide receiver, right?
Correct.
So that means you've got to have the slot guy. It's not Dante come in for Squirrel, who was a sophomore last year, and provide immediate help. It's somebody has to step in there and do something now. And you don't have a transfer coming in. So if you're sliding Dante to the outside, and by the way, I keep hearing things about Dante Thornton about how he is going to have a fantastic year and erase some of the disappointment of last season. But if you're moving him to the outside, you better have a guy like a Jalin Hyatt that can create things from the slot receiver position, because I think we all learned in 2022 that's what makes this football team good.
No, yes, absolutely. That's a huge part of it. And even 2021, I mean, we all forget this. It's because Jalin Hyatt won the Biletnikoff. He made everybody forget about how crucial Velus Jones was in the 2021 season to what was happening. So Squirrel White showed a ton of promise in 2022. I mean, he in mop-up duty, he had 481 yards and 2 touchdowns. And, you know, they were talking about him like he had a disappointing year last year. He still had 67 catches for 803 yards. So It's not like he wasn't a crucial part of the offense. It's just there were a lot of other extenuating factors. I think because of the injuries at receiver, a lot more got put on Squirrel White than is meant to be put on him because he's a slot receiver. And I think that, combined with some of the issues in the way that they ran the offense, limited what he's able to do. Look, Squirrel White was key on those long screens that Tennessee had to run consistently. They are not going to have to run those as much. So I think this year you're going to look at a guy who can get back into his regular system and can be an explosive deep threat. Again, if the wideouts are doing their jobs on the outside, Squirrel White should have a chance to be another Biletnikoff winner, because how many times is he going to be open down the field with his speed, given what he can do and given how this offense is set up?
Yep, and I like his ability. You're right. You pull up those stats. He didn't have a disappointing year last year, especially the fact that we're going to hold Josh Heupel responsible for this to some extent. He thought Dante Thornton was the guy over Squirrel White to start the season, despite what Squirrel had done the year before. So some of that falls at Josh Heupel's feet. If Dante Thornton, here's my thinking. The projection was Thornton may be more physically gifted long-term. So by the end of the year, he's a better football player. But at the beginning, I'm not sure Tennessee shouldn't have started the season with Squirrel White at slot. And if they do that, then I don't know that Dante Thornton ever gets a real opportunity. So you're darned if you do, darned if you don't. But I got to question a little bit Josh Heupel's decision to hand over the slot keys to Dante Thornton when Squirrel White had proven he could drive it just fine.
You know, between that and Joe Milton, we have to ask a real question, Dave. Does Josh Heupel fall in love with the measurables of a player more than the actual production of a player?
You know, I don't know that it's measurables, but I do think he could be perhaps overly allegiant to players. And whether it is, I think he was incredibly loyal to Hendon Hooker after he got the job. He wasn't going to put him in because he wasn't going to put Joe Milton back in because he saw what Hendon Hooker could do. So I think there's a loyalty. I don't know that it's specifically tied to measurables as far as how high you can jump, how far you can throw the ball. It might be, but I don't know that. But certainly Joe Milton would seem to be that case.
Well, what does that say then? I mean, in a positive way about Squirrel White's character, though, because I would sit there and say, I've been producing for you. I'm the proven one. You try to force in a guy because of his measurables ahead of me. And I mean, he could have easily given the middle finger and said, I'm going to go somewhere else. And so I think, but he didn't. He stayed to try to prove his job. And I think that's a very good sign for a guy like Squirrel White, because look, let's call it what it is. More than any other position, and you can't even blame them for it because they're in competition for touches, but receivers are probably the biggest divas of any position, right? They kind of have to be. They want the
Yes.
ball. And so for Squirrel White to accept that and to still do a lot for Tennessee last year, which he did, he actually probably had the most consistent hands for Tennessee last year, and he's not even a possession receiver. And that says a lot about, he basically said, if I lost this job to Dante, I'm going to go win it back. I'm going to go out and prove that I belong in the slot, and I'm going to work my tail off in a way that I think, honestly, unlike Jalin Hyatt, I'm not knocking Jalin Hyatt on this, although it was a little bit negative, but like, it doesn't seem like Squirrel White has ever had the issue of, I need to turn it on now because, scouts are looking. It seems like he's always had it turned on and ready to go. Hasn't he?
Yes. And if you remember, he had a fantastic fall camp last year. So he did have 800 yards receiving. That's a little bit more than I thought he did. But I think a lot of people thought he was going to have a huge monstrous year, not only because of his freshman year, but because of what he did in preseason camp. He was a standout in preseason camp. I mean, he did incredibly well. I kind of thought it might push Dante Thornton on the back burner, but that wasn't the case, and they didn't want to do that. Portions of the program brought to you by our good friends at the Hemp House, the premier hemp dispensary online with a wide variety, great selection, and strict standards to ensure you only receive the best in CBD or Delta products. Go to hemphousechat.com, hemphousechat.com, or use the promo code HOOKED. That's HOOKED for 10% off. All that being said, do you expect that Squirrel White will be Tennessee's leading receiver this year, as Jalin Hyatt was from the slot? That's pretty unusual. Most offenses don't produce most of their passing yardage out of the slot. But do you think that Tennessee will be in that position this year, or you just let things play out how they might play out?
Oh, yeah, I think Squirrel White's going to be the leading receiver. I think Squirrel White is going – I said this. Squirrel White's going to lead in yards. Brew McCoy is going to lead in receptions. I don't know who's going to lead in touchdowns for receiving, but Squirrel White's going to lead in yards and Brew McCoy is going to lead in receptions, is the way I think this year is going to play out. And then I think on the other side, we spoke with Cole Kublik last week. He's high on Chris Brazel. What you're hearing in practice is Dante Thornton. My projection is Mike Matthews. I don't know which one of those is going to win the other wideout spot, but we know Brew McCoy and Squirrel White are going to be starting as the top wideout of the slot guy, assuming they're both healthy.
Okay, you mentioned the X factor, Brazel. Okay, so people are saying on the message board that you want to see Boo Carter lined up with Thornton, McCoy, and Squirrel, and that sounds great. Sounds really cool. How about you go 5 wide with a Brazel? Because I don't think Boo Carter, he's pretty busy trying to figure out the safety position. I don't think he's going to be playing a lot of receiver, but I think you've got a guy in Brazel who's impressed the coaches to the point in which I believe that he's going to be a major factor, some shape, form, or fashion. Does that take away from one of the outside receivers in Brew, or does it take away from Dante, or does that take away from Squirrel? I'm not sure, but he does need to be a factor if we're divvying up yardage and catches and that sort of thing.
He does. He absolutely does need to be a factor. And I think that Brazel, no, actually I'm pushing back. I don't know if he does need to be a factor. Look, I think Heupel's offense works.
Need or will.
I don't think he needs to be a factor. I think Heupel's offense works best. I'm sorry.
How about will? You don't say needs to be, but will he be?
I can't say if he will or not because I don't know who's going to get that other wideout spot. But I only think 3 receivers need to be a factor in Josh Heupel's system for his offense to work. And we've seen that time and time again. You need the dictate coverage wideout. You need the possession wideout. And then you need the slot guy that gets the big yards. And you have Brew McCoy and Squirrel White as the dictate coverage and slot guy. Chris Brazel does sound like he's the possession guy. From everything I've heard, he's got the best hands of those other wideouts, right? Mike Matthews, Chris Brazel, and Dante Thornton. So maybe because of that, he actually takes the other wideout spot, which pushes Matthews and Thornton to the back burner. But then again, you're hearing a lot of good things about Dante Thornton, so who knows? I mean, it's Dave, if if you got a BMW and a Lambo in your front yard, you can only drive one. I mean,
that's fair.
If you got 5 mansions, you can only be in one at one time. So I mean, I think sometimes, like, you're gonna have to make a sacrifice. There's one guy that's really good on this team that's just not going to play a lot this year, quite honestly. And I think it's going to be 2 guys, because I think Heupel needs to go, and I think maybe Thornton and Matthews are the receivers next year.
Well, now wait a second. Let's go back to that 2022 team. Who are the 3 receivers?
Because Cedric Tillman got hurt, it became Brew McCoy, Ramel Keaton, and Jalin Hyatt. Had Cedric Tillman not gotten hurt, it would have been Brew McCoy, Cedric Tillman, Jalin Hyatt.
Wait. 2022.
That's what I was saying. Yeah, 2022.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Brew came in. Okay. So it ended up being the production came from Brew, Ramel,
and Hyatt.
Squirrel. Or Hyatt, excuse me. Brew, Ramel, Hyatt. But Cedric Tillman would have had a significant year had he not gotten hurt. He would have.
At which point, Ramel Keaton would not have been producing.
True. I wonder, though, there's an X and a wide receiver. I wonder if Josh Heupel is comfortable switching out receivers a little bit more often now that he has some depth. When you look at that 2022 team, I think they had 3 guys when Tillman got hurt. I think now they have more guys. So how do they handle it now that they have more guys? That would be my question.
I think they still handle it with 3. I think, and I think where this every bit of proof I've seen throughout most of history is, even with advanced offenses, you want a select group of receivers if you want a championship team. Now, Urban Meyer and the spread that he ran with Tim Tebow is a different story, but most of the time, you pick 2 to 3. And I can go from the pro style with David Cutcliffe. As you remember, Dave, remember when he took back over in 2006 for Randy Sanders, and he said, we're running too many receivers. We're going to have 3. And he said, you're going to have Robert Meacham, Jason Swain, Brett Smith. That's it. Nobody else. And Robert Meacham is going to be the go-to guy. None of this 5-wide set to try to get players going. Then what happened? Remember when Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin adopted elements of the spread to the Alabama offense?
Dude.
And did you ever notice that they always just had one receiver that they really focused on, from Amari Cooper to Henry Ruggs to Devontae Smith? It was always one receiver. And I think Saban understood that. David Cutcliffe understood that. Lane Kiffin understands that. I think Josh Heupel understands that too. There's very few where you spread the ball around a lot. Hugh Freeze kind of runs that offense where I want like 5 receivers and I want them all to get equal touches. But I don't think that's going to work for Heupel's offense, particularly when the offense is so much about getting into a rhythm and running tempo that it's just hard when you're rotating in and out receivers.
Well, and you can't do it during drives with this offense. So
yeah, you can.
You would be talking about from drive to drive. We want to be real clear on that. So don't want to create any sort of confusion.